9 months ago, the wooden legs of my chair shrieked against the ballroom floor just before my spine met empty air. The impact punched the breath from my lungs. Cold marble bit into my hip, and my elbow cracked against the stone so hard my fingers went instantly numb. A shattered water goblet sprayed water and glass across my palms. The clinking silverware and the string quartet died in the exact same second. 200 guests went perfectly silent. Brooke stood above me. Her hands still gripped the back of the chair she had just yanked away. "You do not belong at the family table," she sneered. From his wheelchair beside her, my father tapped his good hand against the metal armrest. 3 sharp knocks. Evan, the groom, pushed his own chair back and stood up. His face looked pale and tight under the chandeliers. "That is enough." He turned to his new wife. "Do you really want me to tell everyone the truth?" Brooke froze. The truth Evan threatened to expose was not a sudden revelation. It was a trail of breadcrumbs I had started following 6 weeks before the wedding. The waiting room of the speech therapy center smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I knelt to adjust the footrest on my father's wheelchair, making sure his right leg rested securely. I checked his water bottle, then counted the pills in his travel case. Brooke burst through the glass doors 20 minutes late. She carried the scent of vanilla perfume and an iced latte. She leaned over our father, snapped a quick photo on her phone, and kissed his cheek. "Gotta run to my final dress fitting," she announced to the room. My mother patted Brooke on the arm. "You go, sweetie." After the heavy glass door swung shut, Mom turned her attention to me. "You should try to be happy for her, Rachel. She finally gets her own special day." I did not argue. I simply wheeled my father toward the treatment room. Later that evening, the care log sat open on my own kitchen table. At 39, running the operations department of a medical center meant I knew how to read billing codes. My finger traced a printed bank statement. A reimbursement check had been issued to my sister for bathroom accessibility equipment. That did not make sense. I had the original contractor invoice right next to the statement. Insurance covered 80% of the renovation, and I had paid the initial deposit from my personal checking account. Brooke had not spent a single cent on that project. Right below that entry sat another line item. A charge of $4,000 linked to a strange merchant identification code. The memo line read like a standard care expense, but the numbers felt wrong. I did not contact Brooke yet. I photographed the statement, printed a second copy, and slipped both pages into my binder. The next afternoon, I drove to my parents' house and placed the contractor invoice on the living room table. I asked Brooke to explain why she had received a reimbursement for an expense I had paid myself. Then I pointed to the unexplained $4,000 charge. Brooke folded her arms in front of the television. "Dad knows I am just organizing things." He agreed to it. My mother dismissed the discrepancy as another example of me trying to control the family. I did not argue with either of them. I looked toward my father, who sat in his wheelchair beside the window. He raised his left hand and struck the wooden side table. 1, 2, 3 loud knocks. In his therapy sessions, 3 knocks meant no. I wrote down the date, the time, and Brooke's exact words before leaving the house. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes. The small 1-bedroom across town was mine. Paid for with my own salary, rented 3 months earlier. The space felt quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of evening traffic drifting through the window. A formal offer letter to resume full-time management hours lay on the dining table, right next to a heavy binder. I opened the binder. It held 5 thick sections, separated by colored tabs. I slid the bathroom invoice into the medical section, wrote the time and date on a yellow sticky note, and pressed it onto the plastic sleeve. I was not going to argue with my mother, and I was not going to yell at my sister. My laptop screen cast a pale light across the dark wood table. An old financial document provided the cross-reference I needed. My father had authorized me to keep those records before his stroke. I needed to know who owned that strange merchant identification number from the $4,000 charge. I typed the digits into the search bar. The database loaded and the results populated on the screen. The air in my kitchen seemed to stop moving. The billing code did not belong to a medical supplier. It It did not belong to a home repair contractor or a pharmacy. It belonged to the Hawthorne Grand Hotel. The hotel had not billed my sister, it had billed my father. I opened my laptop and drafted a short email to my sister. I asked for the original invoices matching 3 specific withdrawals from our father's care account, keeping my tone perfectly flat. I did not hurl accusations, and I did not mention the hotel. I pressed send, closed the lid, and waited. Brooke did not reply in writing. My phone vibrated against the counter 3 minutes later. "Why are you suddenly auditing me?" Brooke demanded the second I answered. Her voice carried a shrill, defensive edge. "I am cleaning up his messy finances. Dad wanted me to handle it." My mother shouted something in the background, telling me to stop trying to control the family. I asked Brooke to put her explanation and the receipts in an email, then I ended the call. The real retaliation arrived the next morning. My phone chimed with a notification from the extended family group chat. Brooke had sent a massive paragraph to our parents and our 2 aunts. She accused me of reimbursing myself for years while pretending to be a selfless caregiver. To prove her point, my sister uploaded a cropped screenshot of a bank transfer. It showed a significant withdrawal, which was the exact amount I had advanced for a wheelchair ramp 6 months earlier. The image deliberately hid the memo line, presenting the raw number as undeniable theft. Mom replied immediately. A new text bubble appeared on the screen, carrying a demand that I return the stolen funds and issue a formal apology before the situation escalated. My teeth ground together until my temples throbbed, but I did not type a defensive paragraph. I opened my digital archives, retrieved the itemized receipt from the medical supply company, and pulled the complete bank record showing my father's signature on the authorized repayment. I attached the files to the chat and sent them without a single word of commentary. The chat went completely silent. No apologies came, and no retractions were posted. Brooke was not just hiding money, she was building a cage, and she needed everyone to believe I belonged in it. The physical barrier appeared on Wednesday afternoon. I drove to the family house to drop off a new prescription. The summer air felt thick and humid, and a neighbor's lawnmower buzzed steadily down the street. I climbed the concrete steps, punched my security code into the electronic door lock, and waited for the familiar click. The keypad flashed red. I wiped the sweat from my thumb and pressed the numbers again, slower this time. Another sharp beep, followed by another red flash. I stood on the porch and listened to the muffled sound of a game show playing through the thick front door. I pulled out my phone and opened the caregiver scheduling application, thinking the system had reset through the network. An error message blocked my screen. My account no longer possessed access to the family profile. My sister had completely removed my administrative rights. Right on cue, a direct message from Brooke appeared in my notifications. The text claimed she needed to protect our father from financial pressure. The second sentence declared the family decided it was best if I stopped coming by the house. I did not pound my fist against the heavy wooden door, nor did I shout for my mother to let me inside. I took a screenshot of the lock screen error and saved the message to a secure folder. Then I dialed the dedicated landline connected to the support device in my father's room. He answered on the second ring. I kept my voice light, telling him I had a scheduling conflict but would see him at his therapy appointment later in the week. He tapped the receiver twice, a rhythmic acknowledgement that he understood. My own apartment felt completely different that evening. The small space smelled faintly of pine cleaner, but every square inch belonged to me. The quiet rooms offered no family arguments and no locked doors. A heavy cardboard box waited in the narrow hallway. I dragged it into the dining area, unpacked the wooden pieces of a second-hand table, and spent the next hour tightening steel bolts with a cold metal wrench. Once the table stood firm on the living room rug, I placed a formal corporate letter on the clean surface. My hospital had offered me a full-time operations management role several months ago, but I had delayed accepting the promotion to maintain a flexible schedule for my father. I picked up a blue pen, signed my name at the bottom of the page, and drafted an immediate acceptance email to the Human Resources Department. I spent the next 2 hours securing my boarders. I set up automatic payments for my rent, locked my credit files, and moved my emergency fund to an entirely new banking institution across town. I opened a yellow notepad and started sketching out a business plan, outlining a consulting service to help families navigate the complex logistics of stroke recovery. I was building an independent fortress, and nobody in my family even knew it existed. The following Tuesday, I carried my heavy evidence binder into a brick building downtown. Monica Reyes ran a boutique elder law practice out of a quiet office on the 3rd floor. The waiting area smelled of polished leather and expensive stationery. Monica sat behind a massive oak desk. A tailored navy suit gave her a calm precision that immediately put me at ease. The attorney opened the binder and began reviewing the categorized tabs with quiet efficiency. The only sound in the room was the sharp rustle of thick paper. After examining the timeline, Monica looked up and folded her hands together. She asked if my ultimate goal was to take control of the family bank accounts, or if I simply wanted to protect my father. I answered without a single second of hesitation. I told her I wanted a neutral professional to manage the money. I explicitly stated that I did not want access to his retirement funds, because taking control would just validate my sister's narrative. Monica nodded slowly, a look of genuine respect crossing her features. A power of attorney lets an agent act for a person, she explained, but it absolutely does not let the agent become that person. She turned to her computer, pulled a digital copy of the actual legal document from the county database, and printed it out. She slid the warm paper across the smooth wood surface toward me. The text clearly outlined a highly restricted scope of authority. My father had authorized payments for medical expenses, daily living costs, and necessary home modifications. The paperwork contained absolutely no broad gifting authority, and it legally mandated that the designated agent keep pristine records of every single transaction. Brooke had failed to provide any accounting when I formally requested it, and she had used a legitimate reimbursement to construct a false accusation. That action alone violated her fiduciary duty. Monica flipped back to the financial tab in my binder. She extracted the bank statement showing the mysterious hotel charge and placed it flat on the desk, right next to the original contractor invoice for the bathroom remodel. She picked up a red pen. She drew a careful circle around the deposit amount on the medical receipt. Then she moved her hand and circled the charge designated for the Hawthorne Grand Ballroom deposit. The two amounts matched exactly, down to the very last cent. Monica cleared the center of her massive oak desk, sweeping her own leather-bound files aside to make room for my heavy binder. We spent the next 2 hours spreading bank statements and medical invoices across the polished wood, organizing every single transaction by month. A distinct chronological pattern emerged under the warm glow of the brass desk lamp. 14 months ago, the withdrawals started incredibly small. A grocery run here, a tank of gas there. Each individual receipt could easily be explained away as a minor oversight or a legitimate errand run for my father's benefit. But 8 months ago, right around the exact time my sister posted her diamond engagement ring online, the numbers violently spiked. Brooke had tested the waters with minor expenses, and when nobody noticed, the floodgates opened wide. The attorney did not waste time with dramatic declarations of outrage. Monica drafted formal preservation notices and sent them directly to the bank, the luxury hotel, and every single vendor listed in the stolen ledger. These legal letters did not immediately demand private records, but rather functioned as an official freeze, legally prohibiting anyone from deleting or altering the payment histories. I sat in a leather guest chair and signed an official intake form for Adult Protective Services, detailing my reasonable suspicions based on the paper trail, without claiming to know every hidden fact. Within the hour, a fraud specialist at the financial institution opened a preliminary review and requested direct contact information for the primary account holder. A soft chime echoed from the computer monitor on the desk. Monica opened a new email, scanned the brief text, and silently turned the screen toward me. A wedding planner had responded to the preservation demand, attaching a short correspondence log to prove her compliance. The forwarded thread contained a specific directive sent from my sister's personal email address, explicitly instructing the planner to use generic billing descriptions for all future venue deposits. Brooke was not just disorganized or confused about her fiduciary boundaries. My sister was actively and methodically constructing a disguise for the redirected funds. Thursday afternoon brought me back to the familiar rehabilitation wing of the hospital where I worked, though this time I arrived as an invited guest. Maya, the lead speech-language pathologist managing my father's case, had explicitly requested my presence to observe the weekly session. Walking into the quiet treatment room felt like crossing a heavily guarded border, and I felt profoundly grateful I did not have to sneak past my mother or break through a locked door just to check on my own family. My father sat near a wide window, his weaker right arm resting securely on the padded tray of his custom wheelchair. A digital communication tablet lay flat in front of him, positioned right beside a laminated board, printed with simple yes and no options. Maya sat directly across from the old man, speaking in a calm, measured tone that conveyed immense respect. The therapist started with baseline cognitive checks, asking the patient to verify the current month, his residential address, and his exact date of birth. The patient responded with complete consistency. Weathered fingers gripped a plastic stylus, sliding the pointer across the screen to select the correct answers without hesitation. His mind remained entirely sharp, trapped behind a neurological wall that simply prevented him from forming complex spoken sentences. Maya gently shifted the topic toward family dynamics, bringing up my mother and then casually mentioning my sister's upcoming wedding. The moment Brooke's name entered the quiet room, my father stopped moving the stylus. The old man raised his functional left hand, bringing his knuckles down hard against the plastic tray. 3 distinct heavy knocks. Stepping forward, I made sure to stand directly in his line of sight. Establishing his true wishes required a question that left zero room for interpretation or manipulation. I asked him if he wanted me to hire an independent attorney to represent his personal interests, completely separate from the rest of the family. The old man did not hesitate. His index finger tapped the word yes on the laminated board with surprising force. Shifting his attention back to the electronic tablet, my father navigated through a custom phrase Bank Maya had built for his specific needs. He selected 2 distinct words, letting the computerized voice speak them aloud into the quiet room. Private meeting. Staring at the glowing screen, a profound sense of clarity anchored me to the floor. For over a year, Mom and Brooke had treated this intelligent man like a silent piece of furniture, constantly speaking on his behalf while interpreting his silence as permanent, passive consent. Falling into the very same trap, I had assumed he needed me to fight his battles and exact justice on his behalf. The truth was far simpler. My father did not need a savior to act for him, but rather a secure, uninterrupted channel to act for himself. Maya closed her clinical notebook. Her expression tightened with deep professional concern as she glanced from the electronic tablet to my face. "Your father has been trying to tell us the same name for 3 weeks, Maya said. Exactly 2 weeks before the ceremony, a medical transport van pulled up to the rehabilitation center. Tuesday afternoon remained my father's standing appointment for speech therapy, an unchangeable block on his calendar. Brooke was currently miles away, standing on a velvet pedestal for her final dress fitting. My mother stayed home, entirely convinced the afternoon consisted of routine vocal exercises and swallowing drills. Inside the clinic, however, Monica Reyes waited in a private conference room alongside an independent geriatric psychiatrist. I met the transport driver at the glass double doors, guided the heavy wheelchair into the quiet corridor, and immediately stepped back. Giving the old man complete autonomy meant letting him face the official evaluation completely alone. I took a seat in the waiting area, listening to the muffled hum of the air conditioner and the occasional chime of the elevator for nearly an hour. The heavy oak door finally opened. The psychiatrist stepped into the hallway and waved me inside. My father sat at the center of the long table, looking exhausted but fiercely focused. A notary public sat to his right, organizing a thick stack of official papers. Monica addressed her client with quiet respect. The attorney asked him to confirm his understanding of the financial documents spread across the wood surface. Weathered fingers moved across the digital tablet. The computerized voice echoed against the bare walls, stating clearly that he never agreed to fund a luxury venue, buy a wedding dress, or pay off personal credit lines. He just wanted his daughter to handle the nursing invoices. Then, a new piece of information appeared on the glowing screen. The patient carefully typed out a memory about a specific text message authorization code. Brooke had told him the security numbers were necessary to process a payment for his outdoor wheelchair ramp. A heavy weight settled in my stomach. That specific string of digits had not been used for medical construction. The access code had successfully authorized my sister as an approved external payee on his primary checking account, effectively bypassing the bank security protocols. The notary pushed a thick document across the table. It was a formal, legally binding revocation of the power of attorney. My father picked up a heavy black pen. His right hand shook slightly, but the signature he carved into the designated line was sharp and deliberate. Monica immediately sorted the copies, preparing the official notices for the financial institution and my sister. Brooke would soon receive a strict deadline to provide a full accounting of every missing dollar. The attorney closed her legal folder and looked across the table. Someone needed to manage the estate while the accounts were frozen and audited. I shook my head before the question could even be fully asked. Taking control of the money would hand Brooke the exact narrative she wanted, confirming her public accusations that I was a jealous sister trying to steal the inheritance. I stated clearly that I would continue to manage his medical transportation and daily care logistics, but I absolutely refused to touch his bank accounts. My father tapped his tablet. He selected a name from a pre-approved list of independent court-certified fiduciaries that Monica had provided. He did not want me fighting over his checking account, and I did not want the job. That ethical boundary permanently separated us from the woman currently trying on a white gown. The retaliation came through a voicemail later that evening. I stood in my kitchen, slicing an apple, while my mother's voice filled the quiet apartment. She did not ask about the therapy session or my father's health. Mom immediately launched into an angry tirade, accusing me of humiliating my sister right before her special day. The law firm had apparently delivered the revocation notice via courier just an hour prior. Mom demanded I call the lawyer and reverse the action immediately. She claimed Brooke always planned to pay the account back using her future inheritance money anyway. The knife stopped moving against the cutting board. My mother had just admitted, out loud on a recorded message, that she knew about the missing funds. She and Brooke had treated a living, breathing man as if he were already dead, quietly dividing his estate to cover floral arrangements and catering deposits. I saved the audio file to my encrypted drive and tossed the apple slices into the trash. 4 days before the ceremony, my phone rang with a number from the bank fraud department. I sat at my second-hand dining table and opened my evidence binder to a blank page. The investigator spoke in a measured, corporate tone. He confirmed receipt of the legal revocation and the independent capacity evaluation. The primary accounts were now completely locked down, subject to a rigorous forensic audit. Then, the specialist offered a crucial piece of timeline information. 3 weeks earlier, my sister had initiated a massive automated clearinghouse transfer. $28,400 had been scheduled to hit the Hawthorne Grand Hotel, timing out perfectly with the final payment deadline for the luxury venue. The wedding portal would have shown the transaction as processing, keeping the lavish event secure on the hotel calendar for weeks. But the legal freeze had just intercepted the actual transfer of funds. The bank had actively reversed the transaction due to the revoked authorization. The final payment was sent 3 weeks ago, the investigator said, the line crackling slightly with static. If this review confirms what we think it does, the hotel is about to learn that the money never truly cleared. The notification from the bank investigator had barely faded from my screen when the phone vibrated again. My sister's name illuminated the dark wood of my kitchen table. I picked up the device and accepted the call, without saying a single word. Brooke started with a sickeningly sweet tone, using a childhood nickname she had not spoken in over a decade. She asked how I was doing and wondered if we could just sit down to talk things out like family. When I remained completely silent, the sugary facade immediately dissolved. Her voice dropped to a sharp, panicked whisper. She demanded I contact the fraud department right that minute to withdraw my complaint. She told me to testify that our father had given her the money as an early inheritance. My knuckles turned white around the phone casing, but I kept my breathing slow and steady. I informed the furious bride that she no longer had any legal authority over the accounts, and I instructed her to direct all future communication to my attorney. Then I ended the call. Monica Reyes did not waste time with phone conversations. The following morning, my lawyer sent a formal settlement demand via certified mail and secure email. The document laid out a very clear set of conditions. Brooke needed to provide a full accounting of every missing dollar, return the unauthorized funds, and immediately stop restricting access to our father. The legal letter set a strict deadline for Friday afternoon, right before the rehearsal dinner. We did not demand the cancellation of the wedding, nor did we ask the hotel to shut down the event. We simply offered the bride one final, legally documented opportunity to stop the bleeding. Brooke ignored the substance of the letter entirely. She sent me a single text message calling me a bitter, unmarried woman who wanted to ruin her happiness out of pure jealousy. My mother took a different approach the next afternoon. Mom called my secondary number and offered a highly conditional peace treaty. She said I was permitted to attend the ceremony because the wedding photographer needed a complete family portrait, and my father stubbornly refused to wear his tuxedo unless I was present. Mom explicitly warned me not to cause a scene, casually adding that my assigned seat would be at a small table near the kitchen doors. I was about to decline the miserable invitation when a picture message arrived from my Aunt Nancy. The image showed my father sitting in his wheelchair, pointing his good hand at his electronic communication board. The tablet displayed two simple sentences: "Please come. Sit with me." Aunt Nancy followed up with a quick text promising to stand by his side and guard his communication device from anyone who might try to take it away. That single image changed my entire strategy. I was not going to hide in my apartment while my family paraded a stolen aesthetic in front of 200 people, and I was definitely not going to abandon my father when he explicitly asked for my presence. Friday evening involved absolutely no dramatic preparations. I drove to the law office and locked my original evidence binder inside a heavy metal filing cabinet, bringing only basic paper copies back to my apartment. I arranged my own transportation to the venue to ensure I could leave the property at any given moment. I did not purchase a gift, and I did not withdraw any cash for the honeymoon fund. Before turning off the lights in my bedroom, I dropped the blue key to my apartment into my formal clutch. That small piece of metal felt like a physical anchor. It reminded me that I had built a safe place to return to, completely out of their reach. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter while I was getting dressed the following morning. The caller identification displayed the name of the groom. Evan sounded incredibly tense, his voice lacking the usual arrogant confidence he carried at family dinners. He asked why my father's name kept appearing on a billing dispute email thread forwarded by the venue coordinator. I adjusted my earring in the mirror and told him to ask his bride where the money came from. A long, heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. Evan begged me not to ruin the wedding over a petty family disagreement. He insisted that whatever financial misunderstanding we were having could wait one more day. The conversation revealed a terrifying truth about the man my sister was about to marry. Evan already suspected something was deeply wrong with the banking situation, but he actively chose the comfort of ignorance over the ugly reality. He wanted the beautiful illusion to survive the weekend, and he expected me to help him protect it. I told him to check his own vendor portal and ended the call. I stepped out of my apartment building and waited for my ride. The morning air felt sharp and clear. Just as a black car pulled up to the curb, a new message illuminated my phone screen. Evan had sent a direct screenshot from the private hotel management system. He was the primary contracting party for the event space, giving him full access to the billing records. The image showed a massive balance due, a declined transaction tag, and my father's name listed as the original account holder. The venue had successfully processed earlier deposits, and Evan had provided his own credit card to hold the booking, preventing the immediate cancellation of the party. But the final $28,000 payment had officially bounced back to the frozen account. A second text arrived right below the image. Evan asked a simple, desperate question. He wanted to know if the banking error was real. I typed my response while sliding into the back seat of the car. I confirmed the truth, adding that his bride had known about the stolen funds for 6 full weeks. The 3 dots of a typing indicator hovered on the screen for a long time before Evan sent his final message. The words confirmed that the elaborate charade was finally beginning to collapse under its own weight. "Brooke says your father gave us the money," Evan wrote. "The hotel says the payment was returned." Walking through the grand entrance of the Hawthorne Grand Hotel felt like stepping into a financial crime scene. The air smelled of imported white roses and burning vanilla candles. Thousands of dollars hung suspended from the ceiling in massive crystal chandeliers. Every single floral arrangement and silver serving tray represented hours of physical therapy my father would never receive. Relatives turned their heads away as I passed their tables, sipping champagne and avoiding eye contact. I kept my chin level, refusing to shrink under their collective judgment, and walked straight toward the main reception area. Near the head table, Brooke performed the role of the flawless bride for a hovering videographer. Her white silk gown caught the professional lighting perfectly. She leaned down, wrapping her arms lovingly around our father for a posed photograph. While smiling for the lens, her manicured hand subtly pushed his electronic communication tablet completely off the edge of the table, hiding it from the camera frame. My mother intercepted me halfway across the dance floor. Mom grabbed my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. Her voice dropped to a harsh, frantic whisper, explicitly warning me to keep my mouth shut about the banking situation and demanding I let the family enjoy the evening. A few feet away, the groom did not look like a man enjoying his wedding day. Evan stood near the edge of the stage, staring down at his glowing phone screen. His jaw muscles clenched tight. He kept refreshing his internet browser. The venue had allowed the reception doors to open because his personal credit card acted as a safety deposit, but that massive returned payment loomed over everything. Evan caught my eye and gestured toward a quiet alcove near the coat check. His tuxedo collar looked too tight against his neck. The moment I stepped into the shadows, he demanded absolute proof that the old man had not authorized the final venue withdrawal. I maintained a generous physical distance from him. Explaining the independent medical evaluation and the notarized legal revocation felt unnecessary in a crowded hallway. I simply advised him to ask the account holder directly, right in front of a neutral witness. The groom rubbed his temples, squeezing his eyes shut. He admitted his new wife swore the disputed money was a generous wedding gift, intended for them all along. My response required zero hesitation. Then she should have no reason to stop him from answering. Moving back into the main ballroom, I checked the gold-trimmed seating chart displayed near the bar. Brooke had assigned my name to a tiny overflow table located directly adjacent to the swinging kitchen doors. The sharp scent of industrial dish soap easily overpowered the floral centerpieces back there. I began walking toward my assigned exile. Across the room, my father watched my path. His left hand suddenly slammed against the metal armrest of his wheelchair. 3 sharp, echoing knocks cut right through the soft background music. Aunt Nancy immediately leaned down, reading his laminated board. She looked across the sea of guests, caught my attention, and waved me over. A venue coordinator materialized beside her almost instantly, carrying a spare wooden chair with a white cushion. The staff member carried the seat right up to the main family table, placing it directly next to the wheelchair. The bride spotted the new arrangement before I even reached the center of the room. Brooke marched over, the heavy silk skirt of her gown rustling aggressively against the polished stone floor. She leaned close to my face. Her voice started as a venomous hiss, ordering me to return to the back of the room where I belonged. I stood my ground beside the empty chair. I stated calmly that I intended to sit exactly where the guest of honor requested. Her face flushed a deep, ugly red. The bride raised her volume, ensuring the neighboring tables heard every single word. She loudly accused me of trying to steal the spotlight to distract everyone from my own thievery. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic energy. I simply looked down at the old man sitting between us. Dad can answer for himself. I reached down, smoothing the back of my dress, and began to lower myself onto the white cushion. Fingers wrapped around the wooden backrest behind me. The bride jerked her arms backward with sudden, violent force. The wooden legs shrieked against the polished floor. My spine met empty air. The impact knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. Cold marble bit into my hip, and my elbow cracked against the stone so hard my fingers went instantly numb. A shattered water goblet sprayed cold liquid and sharp glass across my right palm. The string quartet stopped playing in the middle of a measure. 200 guests went perfectly silent. Dozens of cell phone cameras, already raised to record the upcoming bridal speeches, captured the entire physical sequence. Standing above me, Brooke sneered her prepared line, declaring I did not belong at the family table. Beside her, my father hammered his fist against the armrest. 3 knocks, a short pause, 3 more knocks, a continuous, undeniable rhythm of absolute rejection. The groom pushed his own chair back so hard it tipped over. Evan shot to his feet, his face pale and rigid under the crystal lighting. He intercepted his wife before she could take another step toward me. "That is enough," Evan said. His voice carried clearly across the silent ballroom. He turned to face the woman he had just married. "Do you really want me to tell everyone the truth?" Brooke froze. The confident, righteous anger drained out of her face, replaced immediately by raw panic. She realized he had checked the vendor portal. The bride knew her husband had seen the notification, confirming the stolen funds had been returned. A mechanical whirring sound broke the heavy tension. My father slowly extended his functional arm, reaching directly toward his electronic communication tablet resting on the table. Brooke did not look at her husband. She did not look down at me. The bride lunged straight for the device. A man in a dark suit intercepted the bride before her fingers could graze the electronic screen. The venue security guard stepped squarely between Brooke and the wheelchair, crossing his arms in a silent warning. Aunt Nancy snatched the digital tablet from the table and placed it directly onto my father's lap. My right palm throbbed with a sharp, burning pain. A catering waiter knelt beside me on the cold marble floor, pressing a thick linen napkin into my hand to catch the blood from the shattered goblet. I did not attempt to stand up. I stayed exactly where I was, keeping my eyes fixed on the man sitting at the head of the family table. The groom ignored his frantic wife. Evan turned his entire body toward the wheelchair and looked down at his father-in-law. His voice sounded remarkably steady, completely stripped of its usual arrogance. "Did you agree to pay for this wedding?" Evan asked. My father lifted his left hand. His knuckles struck the metal armrest. 1, 2, 3. The sharp sounds echoed across the silent ballroom. Weathered fingers gripped the plastic stylus, pressing firmly against the glowing screen. A robotic voice filled the quiet space. "No." Panic twisted my sister's perfectly contoured face. She pointed a trembling finger down at me, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. The bride screamed that I had trained a brain-damaged man like a circus animal. She claimed the speech therapist, and I spent months coaching him to ruin her special day. My left hand reached into the formal clutch resting near my knee. My fingers found 2 folded pieces of paper. I pulled them out and held them up toward the groom. Evan stepped forward and took the documents from my hand. The first page was a signed acknowledgement of an independent medical evaluation confirming total cognitive capacity. The second page was the official, notarized revocation of the power of attorney. I did not pass around his private medical history to the 200 guests watching us, but the legal summary provided all the proof required. Standing right beside the wheelchair, Aunt Nancy raised her chin. She announced to the entire room that she had read the clinical communication guidelines, confirming her brother understood every single word spoken to him. The old man ignored the screaming woman in the white dress. He focused entirely on his screen, slowly navigating through the custom phrase, "bank." The mechanical voice spoke again. "I understand." Another agonizing pause followed while he searched for the next specific tile. "Brooke used my money." I remained on the floor with the bloody napkin pressed against my skin. I never once reached for the machine, completely destroying my sister's accusation of physical manipulation. Evan stared at the legal notices in his hand, and then he looked directly at his new wife. He informed her that the final venue payment had bounced back after a bank review that very morning. The groom stated that every previous deposit had originated from a checking account belonging exclusively to Thomas Bennett. Stepping out from the shadows near the kitchen doors, the wedding planner gave a tight nod, verifying that the vendor portal logs remained perfectly intact and accurate. Cornered by the digital trail, Brooke finally cracked. The bride shouted that he would have given it to her eventually. The words poured out of her mouth in a desperate, furious rush. Brooke screamed that the estate money would be hers down the line anyway, and she accused me of trying to waste her rightful inheritance on useless nursing homes. Dozens of glowing cell phone screens captured the raw entitlement echoing off the high ceiling. My mother lunged forward, grabbing Brooke by the forearm in a frantic attempt to silence her. The effort came entirely too late. The truth had already been recorded from 20 different angles. Evan dropped his white linen napkin onto the closest table. He looked at the woman he had married just hours ago with absolute disgust. The groom announced that the reception was officially over, turned his back on the bridal party, and walked out the main double doors without looking back. The venue manager quietly approached the screaming bride, politely reminding her that the contracting party still needed to resolve the missing final balance. Brooke spun around, her eyes wild, and ordered me to pay the hotel to save the family from public embarrassment. I let the waiter help me to my feet. Dad's medical care is not your wedding fund. 2 security guards flanked the bride, firmly guiding her toward the side exit as she continued to shout my name. The urgent care waiting room smelled of antiseptic wipes and old magazines. A nurse had just finished picking glass shards out of my palm and wrapping the wound in clean gauze. My phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. I pulled the device out and opened a new text message from Monica Reyes. The lawyer did not offer any small talk. The bank found an external account in Brooke's name. The wedding was only part of it. 3 days later, deep purple and sickly yellow bruising bloomed across my right hip. Moving around my small kitchen required slow, deliberate steps, and the thick white bandage wrapped securely around my palm made holding a coffee mug nearly impossible. I had filed a formal assault report with the local police department right from the urgent care waiting room, refusing to minimize the violence. The investigating officer confirmed the hotel management had fully cooperated, securing all surveillance footage from the ballroom before the catering crew even finished sweeping up the shattered glass. The official interviews began the following Tuesday morning. I sat across from an adult protective services social worker in a quiet, neutral conference room, sliding thick paper folders across the table. These copies were pristine, organized chronologically with clear sticky notes, because my original binder remained safely locked inside my lawyer's office. My father participated in his own separate interview alongside his trusted speech therapist, utilizing his electronic board to verify his exact wishes without anyone speaking over him. By the end of that first week, a court-appointed independent fiduciary had officially assumed total control over his daily care expenses, severing my sister's access completely. The true financial reality took another 2 weeks to fully unspool. Monica Reyes called me into her office on a rainy Thursday afternoon and spread the preliminary forensic accounting report across her polished oak desk. The total stolen amount hovered around $120,000, drained systematically over 18 months. Only a fraction of that fortune had paid for the white roses and the crystal chandeliers. The attorney pointed her silver pen toward a dense cluster of transactions routed to an external bank account. Brooke had used that hidden reserve to pay off her personal credit cards, fund weekend vacations, and buy expensive clothing. But the most sickening detail hid in the digital transaction notes. My sister had intentionally altered the memo fields on several massive transfers, deliberately labeling them as caregiver reimbursements directed toward me. She had spent months building a paper trail designed to frame me for the theft. It was a vicious strategy, and it would have worked perfectly if not for the banking security logs. The corporate investigator pulled the exact device histories for every single login. The data proved unequivocally that the fraudulent transfers originated exclusively from an Internet Protocol address registered to my sister's laptop. Furthermore, the timestamps showed the unauthorized transactions occurred during hours when my hospital punch cards confirmed I was actively managing the rehabilitation floor. Brooke did not stop trying to manipulate the system, even after her public humiliation at the venue. The security records revealed 3 frantic login attempts made from her cell phone late on the night of the wedding. She had tried to access the frozen accounts, desperately attempting to change the payment source and force the venue balance through. One attempt even utilized the specific one-time authorization code our father thought was for his outdoor wheelchair ramp. The system had permanently locked her out. Stripped of her financial power, the former bride retreated to her favorite weapon. Brooke posted a massive, tearful statement on her social media pages, claiming a bitter sister had manipulated a sick, confused old man into ruining a beautiful marriage. I did not type a single word in defense, nor did I report the post to the platform moderators. I simply let the internet do the work for me. Infuriated by the sudden disruption to their evening, dozens of wedding guests ignored family loyalty and uploaded their own unedited videos of the reception. High-definition clips of the violent chair pull, the tablet grab, and her screaming confession about spending her early inheritance flooded the local networks. The final blow came from a former bridesmaid. The young woman forwarded a series of private text messages sent months before the ceremony, wherein Brooke openly bragged that I would completely lose all access to the family house the second the vows were spoken. My mother appeared at my apartment building the very next morning, standing in the lobby while rain dripped from her dark wool coat. I met her by the security desk but explicitly refused to invite her upstairs to my private space. Linda gripped my uninjured wrist, her fingers cold and trembling. She begged me to call the authorities and reclassify the missing funds as a generous family gift, insisting we could handle the mess internally. I stepped back, forcing the older woman to drop my arm. Asking her directly if she had known about the stolen money felt like swallowing broken glass, but I pushed the question past my lips anyway. Mom looked down at the wet floor mats, her voice barely above a whisper. She admitted knowing about a small portion of the spending. The woman who raised me confessed she thought Brooke would eventually pay it back, rationalizing the theft as a harmless early inheritance advance. I reminded my mother that her husband was still breathing, still required daily medical care, and desperately needed his own savings to survive right now. A few days later, my father left the family home for good. The independent fiduciary orchestrated a quiet, permanent transfer to a specialized assisted living facility with 24-hour neurological support. I helped arrange his favorite potted plants by the wide window and mounted his communication tablet securely to the bedside table. I did not control his checking account, and I did not manage his legal schedule. My mother retained her standard visitation rights, but she surrendered all authority to sign medical or financial paperwork on his behalf. The quiet rhythm of my new life broke when my cell phone vibrated violently against the kitchen counter. A local police detective introduced himself through the speaker, his tone clipped and strictly professional. He called to inform me that the district attorney had just finished reviewing the complete forensic file, the bank records, and the guest videos. The prosecutor had officially accepted the case, pushing forward with charges of felony embezzlement, financial exploitation by an agent, and battery. My sister was no longer dealing with a quiet family dispute, but with the crushing weight of the criminal justice system. The winter months dragged into a cold, wet spring, bringing a slow but inevitable cascade of consequences. Evan finalized his divorce paperwork, long before the cherry blossoms bloomed around the courthouse plaza. The former groom mailed a thick manila envelope to my apartment containing printed copies of every single email exchange he had ever shared with the hotel billing department. A small yellow sticky note rested on top of the stack, carrying a brief apology. The man finally admitted he had ignored the glaring warning signs simply because he wanted a beautiful reception, choosing comfort over reality. Tossing the handwritten note into the trash, I handed the pristine digital records straight to the prosecutor, and we never spoke again. My sister spent the first 4 months of the year declaring her absolute innocence. Brooke boldly told her expensive defense attorney she would go to trial and expose my terrible lies to a sympathetic jury. That arrogant confidence completely evaporated the moment the district attorney pushed a massive cardboard box across the mediation table. The heavy container held the complete forensic accounting report, the device login logs proving her location during the transfers, and the sworn statement from our father. Facing an insurmountable mountain of physical evidence, the defense attorney strongly advised his client to accept a formal plea agreement. The negotiated charges included felony embezzlement, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and misdemeanor battery. The financial reality of her surrender hit immediately. The court mandated a strict restitution plan as a non-negotiable part of the agreement, forcing the former bride to sell her luxury sport utility vehicle and liquidate her remaining savings account. She had to surrender every single dollar of the vendor refunds the hotel had issued after the canceled wedding, and she permanently lost any right to act as a financial representative for another human being. Any unpaid balance would convert into an immediate violation of her future probation. On the morning of the formal sentencing hearing, the courthouse hallway smelled heavily of lemon floor wax and damp wool. Brooke cornered me outside the heavy wooden double doors, wearing a plain gray suit completely stripped of her usual expensive jewelry. Her voice trembled, dropping the angry facade for a desperate, pleading whisper. The terrified woman begged me to step inside the courtroom and tell the judge our father had always intended to give her the money. Fingers clawed at my jacket sleeve, demanding to know if I was really going to stand there and let my own flesh and blood go to prison. Pulling my arm away, I smoothed the wrinkled fabric. My voice remained completely steady as I reminded her that she had been given 6 full weeks to return the stolen funds after my initial email. The bride had been offered countless opportunities to simply tell the truth before deciding to pull a chair out from under me in front of 200 people. The courtroom felt cavernous and intimidating, lined with dark oak benches and bright fluorescent lights. My father sat in the front row, his wheelchair parked securely next to the wooden railing. Maya stood beside him, quietly adjusting the volume knob on his electronic communication device. When the presiding judge called for the victim impact statement, the walk to the wooden podium felt incredibly long. Rather than carrying my own speech, my hands held a single piece of paper containing the exact sentences my father had painstakingly selected during his therapy sessions. The statement ignored the missing money entirely. Those carefully chosen words focused strictly on the profound indignity of being treated like a silent, unthinking object. The quiet room amplified my voice as I read his description of watching his youngest daughter steal his voice to justify her greed. Finishing the printed paragraph, I moved away from the microphone. My father lifted his left hand. His weathered finger pressed a single, pre-programmed tile on his glowing screen, and the robotic voice carried clearly across the silent room. Rachel told the truth. The judge offered no sympathetic lectures to the defense table. The bench simply accepted the negotiated plea and read the final sentence into the official record. Brooke received a total of 3 years, with 18 months of active incarceration and the remainder suspended. A long period of supervised probation and mandatory full restitution would follow her eventual release. Security officers stepped forward, gently but firmly guiding the weeping woman toward the holding area. No triumphant joy rushed through my veins, and no smile crossed my face. Hearing an official authority and my own father validate my reality provided the only closure I truly required. My mother intercepted me on the concrete steps outside the building, clutching her expensive leather purse against her chest. Linda immediately demanded my financial help to cover the massive defense attorney fees, and when I simply shook my head, a furious glare filled her eyes. The older woman insisted the family needed to heal, loudly commanding me to write a letter of forgiveness to the parole board. Stopping on the stairs, I looked directly at the person who had enthusiastically changed the locks on my childhood home. Forgiveness, I explained calmly, did not require me to erase the legal consequences of a crime, nor did it obligate me to write a check to fix a disaster I did not create. Leaving her standing in the cool spring air, I drove back to my quiet neighborhood. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished floor of my apartment lobby. I unlocked my door, dropped my keys onto the small dining table, and checked my cell phone. The screen displayed 12 missed calls, all originating from my mother's number. A single text message hovered below the missed call notifications, carrying an impossible demand. "Come home. We need to decide what happens to this family now." I stared at the glowing screen of my cell phone, reading the 12 missed call notifications and the single text message demanding my immediate return. A year earlier, that specific combination of digital panic would have sent me running for my car keys. I would have abandoned my quiet evening, driven straight to the sprawling house in the suburbs, and immediately started fixing whatever crisis my mother had allowed to fester. Instead, I set the device face down on the small wooden table. I walked into my kitchen, poured a glass of cold tap water, and drank it slowly. When I finally picked the phone back up, I did not call her. I typed a brief response, offering to meet her at a neutral coffee shop on Tuesday afternoon. I added a clear, non-negotiable condition, stating that if she intended to discuss any financial matters, my attorney, Monica Reyes, would need to be present. The local coffee shop smelled of roasted espresso beans and burnt sugar. My mother sat in a corner booth, wearing a perfectly pressed silk blouse that entirely failed to hide the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She did not ask how I was doing, nor did she mention my injured hand. Linda immediately reached into her expensive leather purse and slid a yellow legal pad across the scratched wooden table. The handwritten list outlined her vision for the family recovery plan. She wanted me to move back into my childhood bedroom to manage the property maintenance. The second item demanded I take out a personal bank loan to of the The final bullet on her list suggested we pull my father out of his specialized assisted living facility and bring him back to the family house, completely eliminating his expensive monthly care fees. She looked across the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. My mother told me I was the strong one, and she insisted it was my ultimate duty to put the broken pieces of our lives back together. I did not raise my voice, and I did not reach for the yellow notepad. I looked directly at the woman who had happily surrendered my house keys to a thief just a few months prior. I told her my father had a court-appointed fiduciary, a dedicated neurological care plan, and the legal right to choose his own living environment. I promised to visit him, support his physical therapy, and be a good daughter. But I explicitly refused to become a free nurse, a limitless bank account, or a human shield for her relentless denial. I spent years protecting this family from consequences, I said, sliding the legal pad back across the table. That is over. My mother blinked, her practiced expression finally breaking into genuine, unmasked shock. She sat completely alone in the corner booth while I walked out the glass doors and stepped into the warm spring afternoon. Now, standing in my hospital office in July of 2026, that coffee shop meeting feels like a lifetime ago. A heavy brass nameplate rests on my desk, displaying my official title as the operations manager for the rehabilitation wing. I accepted the corporate promotion 2 weeks after the sentencing hearing, finally reclaiming the career trajectory I had paused to become a full-time caregiver. The professional stability provided the exact foundation I needed to launch CareBridge Consulting. My small side business secured its very first official client last month, helping a local family organize a secure medical trust for a relative with severe expressive aphasia. I use my intimate knowledge of the healthcare system to help people establish clear boundaries and bulletproof documentation. I do not use my father to sell my services, but his quiet resilience informs every single piece of advice I give to panicked families. His new life looks remarkably peaceful. The assisted living apartment features wide windows, allowing natural sunlight to wash over a row of green ferns I helped him pick out at the local nursery. His customized communication tablet sits securely mounted to an adjustable metal stand, always within an inch of his functional left hand. During my visit last Sunday, the facility catering director knocked on the open door holding a printed weekly menu. My father did not need anyone to interpret his preferences or guess his appetite. He tapped the glowing screen, selected the roasted chicken over the vegetarian pasta, and confirmed a preference for an early dining time. Those tiny, mundane choices represent the total restoration of his basic human agency. My mother still visits him on Tuesday afternoons, bringing fashion magazines and idle neighborhood gossip, but she no longer possesses the legal authority to sign a single piece of paper on his behalf. The ultimate proof of my own independence arrived on a quiet Friday evening. I stood in my apartment hallway, holding the blue key that had anchored me during the darkest weeks of the financial audit. I unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door wide open. Aunt Nancy stood in my small kitchen, pouring sparkling water into 3 glass tumblers. My father sat at the head of the second-hand dining table I had assembled entirely by myself back in the fall. The wooden surface was not covered in expensive white roses, and no crystal chandeliers hung above our heads. The smell of roasted garlic and fresh vegetables filled the warm space, replacing the sterile scent of the hospital and the suffocating perfume of the hotel ballroom. I took the empty seat directly next to the wheelchair. The old man looked around the small, brightly lit room. His weathered fingers moved carefully across the digital tablet, selecting a specific sequence of words from his custom phrase bank. The robotic voice echoed clearly against the painted walls. "This is family." Aunt Nancy raised her glass, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I raised my own water glass, tapping it gently against the rim of his cup. Nobody yelled, nobody checked a hidden bank account on their phone, and nobody asked me to sacrifice my future to maintain an illusion of perfection. After finishing the meal and clearing the ceramic plates, I walked into my bedroom and pulled the heavy evidence binder from the bottom drawer of my desk. The colored plastic tabs felt thick and familiar under my fingertips. The medical invoices, the bank logs, and the legal revocation papers had successfully served their ultimate purpose. I placed the massive binder on the highest shelf of my closet and closed the wooden door, officially retiring the physical weight of the betrayal. Just as I walked back toward the living room, my new dedicated business phone rang. The device vibrated against the kitchen counter, displaying an unknown local number. I answered with my professional greeting. A woman spoke through the receiver, her voice thick with panic and exhaustion. She took a ragged breath, apologizing for calling so late in the evening. The stranger explained that her father had recently suffered a massive stroke, leaving him completely unable to speak. The woman started crying, confessing that her older brother had just accused her of stealing money from the medical fund, and the rest of her relatives were already demanding she return the cash to keep the peace. I did not offer empty sympathy, and I did not tell her everything would magically resolve itself. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a fresh, empty manila folder, and picked up a black pen. "Take a deep breath," I told the crying woman. "Now, tell me what records you already have." Sometimes, being the strong one in your family is a trap. You are taught that love means silently carrying the heavy burdens, absorbing the financial hits, and smoothing over the toxic behavior of the people closest to you just to keep the peace. But true love does not require you to become a human shield for someone else's greed. This story teaches us a very practical lesson. Setting a firm boundary is not an act of betrayal. When you suspect financial exploitation, especially of a vulnerable parent, your greatest weapon is not a shouting match at the holiday dinner table. Your greatest weapons are meticulous documentation, professional legal boundaries, and the absolute refusal to accept a false narrative. You have the right to step away from the family table if the cost of your seat is your own sanity and financial security. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a relative to protect yourself or a loved one from being used? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today to finally stop paying the price for someone else's choices.